Welcome to China Elite Politics, a podcast about Chinese Communist Party elite politics and operations, US-China relations, and China-related geopolitics. I'm Larry Ong, Senior Analyst at SinoInsider. This is episode 3 of the podcast. In this episode, I'll look at the Chinese Communist Party's effort to leverage recent focus on anti-Asian hate in America to get ahead in great power competition, and how America should respond. Alright, let's begin. On March 16, a mass shooter killed 8 people at 3 massage parlors in Atlanta, Georgia. 6 of the victims were Asian women, 4 of whom were of Asian descent. According to the Atlanta police, the shooter said he was motivated by sex addiction, not racial bias. Despite the police statement, mainstream media outlets, left-wing politicians, and Asian American advocacy groups framed the shooting as a racist hate crime. They claim that Asian American hate crimes and incidents are rising due to the coronavirus pandemic and the rhetoric of former President Donald Trump. Trump has described SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, as the China virus or Wuhan virus. Chinese Communist Party propaganda outlets would borrow the arguments of the American mainstream media and political left in reporting on the Atlanta shooting and subsequent rallies held to protest Asian American hate. Nationalist PRC propaganda tabloid Global Times wrote in a March 23rd news item that, quote, "In the face of the US government's increased hostility toward China and the continued festering legacy of former President Donald Trump, deep-seated hatred toward Asians will continue to loom over America and further tear it apart." 2 days after that, state mouthpiece Xinhua published a commentary claiming that, quote, "Unscrupulous Washington politicians and media outlets have been explicitly manipulating racist rhetoric and sentiments by linking the deadly pathogen to specific ethnic groups, leading to increasing violence and hate against Asian Americans." Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party spotlighted deep-rooted racial discrimination in its recently released annual report on human rights in America. The report even opened with a quote from George Floyd, the African-American man who died during a police arrest in May 2020. But this report happens to be a specific piece of propaganda that Communist China publishes each year to counter America's annual assessment of the global human rights situation. It is Beijing's way of deflecting attention away from US findings of gross abuses in mainland China. Beijing also appears to be playing an active role in supporting the Asian anti-hate rallies in America. According to a widely circulated screenshot of a WeChat message, the PRC consulate in San Francisco was encouraging local Chinese Americans to participate in a Stop Asian Hate rally on March 27. At this juncture, listeners who have been following the news regularly may wonder if the Chinese Communist Party is correct in criticizing America over anti-Asian racism and other so-called human rights problems. The short answer is definitely not. Communist China is the least qualified regime to chastise the US over human rights abuses and racism. Today, in the far western Chinese region of Xinjiang, Uyghur Muslims and other ethnic minorities are forced to learn Mandarin and forget their mother tongue. Uyghur men who refuse to shave their beards and Uyghur women who wear veils are arrested and locked up in detention centers. There, they are tortured and brainwashed in Marxism-Leninism and socialism with Chinese characteristics. They are forced to denigrate Islam, for example, by being forced to eat pork. Young people are being sterilized, and many prisoners report receiving blood tests. This last point indicates that Uyghurs, like other prisoners of conscience in China, are probably being killed for their organs. Scholars make a strong case when they argue that the Chinese Communist Party is carrying out cultural genocide in Xinjiang. Meanwhile, the idea that President Trump's tough on China policies somehow contributed to rising anti-Asian hate by white supremacists can't be supported when we look at the data. According to FBI statistics, Asian Americans accounted for just 3.1% to 4.4% of all hate crimes reported in America between 2016 to 2019, or about 100 plus to 200 cases per year. Breaking down these figures further, a 2018 Department of Justice report states that the bulk of violent incidents committed against Asian Americans were by blacks. Asian on Asian incidents and white on Asian incidents tied for second. Data, however, is an unreliable and imprecise metric to assess the level of racial animosity in America. For one, what constitutes a hate crime or a hate incident differs from state to state. Also, what is hate to one person may not be so to another individual or the police. Then there are advocacy groups with clear political biases. These have an interest in finding spikes in racial hate incidents to advance their agenda. For instance, many news outlets repeat that the California-based non-profit Stop AAPI Hate has tracked over 3,800 cases of self-reported hate incidents between March 2020 to February 2021. But Stop AAPI Hate's data also shows that the vast majority of its cases involve verbal harassment, shunning, or avoidance, not physical assault or crime. Furthermore, news outlets usually fail to mention that Stop AAPI Hate is hardly an impartial observer. The organization has a strong anti-Trump, pro-Biden, pro-Democrat, and pro-progressive bias. Perhaps a better gauge of how Asian Americans, and Chinese in particular, feel about Trump's tough China policies can be glimpsed from the support for the former president in the Chinese dissident community. Before the 2020 presidential election, mainstream news outlets published several articles about the phenomenon of Chinese Americans and dissidents backing Trump, a supposed white supremacist and authoritarian. Perry Link, an emeritus professor of East Asian Studies at Princeton University, explained this a bit further. In a recent video lecture, he notes that Chinese dissidents tend to support Trump because they like his China policies. These dissidents appreciate that the Trump administration saw the Chinese Communist Party clearly for what it is, including differentiating between the party and the Chinese people. Professor Link also noted that Chinese dissidents see Democrats drifting too closely to the extreme leftist style of Chairman Mao, especially their use of moral intimidation to enforce the politically correct way to talk about racial movements like Black Lives Matter. If that is the case, then it is unsurprising that no Chinese dissidents spoke at the 2020 Democratic National Convention, while the famous Chinese human rights lawyer Chen Guangcheng declared his support for President Trump at the Republican National Convention last year. Finally, the idea that referring to a disease by its place of origin will engender racism is tenuous at best. People have been talking about Hong Kong food, Spanish flu, and Ebola for decades. Yet the inhabitants of those places have not been stigmatized by association with the respective disease. Ongoing efforts to label as racist references of the coronavirus by place of origin appears to be primarily motivated by politics and ideology in America, and regime interests in communist China. The Chinese Communist Party wants the world to forget that the virus originated in Wuhan, as well as its cover-up that led to the pandemic. Meanwhile, the Democrats want to virtue signal how woke they are, and find another excuse to call Trump and his supporters racist. There is a lot of analysis out there about why the Democrats are embracing wokeism and other neo-Marxist theories. However, this podcast is about Chinese Communist Party operations, so I'll skip over the US angle and focus on explaining what Communist China is seeking to accomplish by spotlighting anti-Asian hate in America and encouraging related activism. First, the Chinese Communist Party is looking to divide American society to weaken the United States. A US focused on domestic troubles will have less time and energy to confront and compete effectively with Communist China. Less US pressure means more opportunities for Beijing to survive domestic troubles and advance its world domination agenda. Second, the Chinese Communist Party is playing the racism card to guilt-trip the Biden-Harris administration into abandoning the tough Trump-era China policies. Already, American scholars, journalists, and pundits are calling on Washington to scrape Trump's China policies to lower US-China tensions. Such calls have only grown louder after the heated Alaska meeting, which I analyzed in the previous episode of this podcast. Again, the Chinese Communist Party is looking to survive and dominate. Third, the Chinese Communist Party is exploiting attention on Asian American hate to avoid being held accountable for causing the pandemic. Beijing's tactic appears to be somewhat successful. For instance, Secretary of State Tony Blinken suggested Washington wouldn't punish Communist China over its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic when asked in an interview with CNN that aired on March 28. However, some Asian Americans continue to demand accountability from the Communist Party for its role in the pandemic. In a widely circulated Twitter video of a Stop Asian Hate rally, an Asian man holding a yellow placard with the words, "Hold CCP liable, Stop Asian Hate," can be spotted in the crowd. The man had to bob and weave to keep his placard on display as other protesters tried to block him. This scene is not unusual in considering that Beijing had a hand in amassing support for the anti-Asian hate rallies in North America. Finally, Beijing is seizing the opportunity to strengthen its rule over the Chinese people by juxtaposing racial chaos in America with order and stability in mainland China. Such comparisons make socialism with Chinese characteristics look good and democracy unappealing to the Chinese people. Also, the Chinese Communist Party knows that repeated propaganda about the strengths of its authoritarian communist system versus the weaknesses of liberal democratic systems will aid the export of its malign ideology and political system around the world. After all, people and countries naturally want to learn from success and avoid failure. Now that we know what Beijing is doing in spotlighting anti-Asian hate in America, let's look at what Washington can do in counter. First, Washington needs to end its embrace of critical race theory, wokeism, and other neo-Marxist theories. Reversing racial balkanization in America will deny the Communist Party openings to split American society and weaken the United States. Also, media outlets, pundits, and think tanks must be responsible and stick to the facts in reporting. That means no opportunistic framing of crimes as racially motivated when the individuals involved happen to match the woke narrative, but when available evidence suggests otherwise. Second, the Biden-Harris administration should consider walking back an executive order stating that references to the COVID-19 pandemic by geographic location of its origin is xenophobic and racist. As I've explained earlier, diseases have historically been named after their place of origin. Also, the racial stigmatization argument mostly helps the Chinese Communist Party memory hold its role in causing the pandemic. Washington, however, may wish to stay politically correct on the matter of referencing the pandemic and the coronavirus. In that case, the Biden-Harris administration should have no quarrel with the phrase CCP virus, which helps people remember that the regime's cover-up of the epidemic in Wuhan led directly to the current pandemic. Finally, the Biden-Harris administration ought to take a leaf out of the Trump administration's book and differentiate between the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese people. After all, the party clings to totalitarian Marxism-Leninism and does not represent the Chinese civilization and people. Making the distinction signals clearly to the Chinese people that America's tough actions against the People's Republic of China are not born out of yellow peril racism, but are aimed squarely at confronting the malign behavior of the Chinese Communist Party. Distinguishing between the party and the Chinese people also blunts Beijing's effort to brand tough US actions towards Communist China as racist. Seeking to educate Americans about the communist rather than Chinese threat may also help to lower the incidence of anti-Asian hate crimes throughout the country. Let's recap briefly. In this episode, we explained why Communist China is interested in exploiting fear of anti-Asian racism for its hegemonic ends. We also looked at how Washington can effectively counter the Chinese Communist Party's use of the racism card. By drawing a clear line between the Communist Party and the people of China, the Biden administration could reduce misunderstandings about the US-China relationship. It would also deny Beijing the use of racism as a powerful propaganda tool to divide American society and turn Americans against one another. That's it for today. If you found the information and analysis useful, please feel free to share it with others. See you in the next episode.